Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Charlie Tyrell, a Toronto filmmaker whose really lovely short film, My Dead Dad's Porno Tapes, was named one of Canada's top 10 shorts last year by TIFF, and is currently on the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences shortlist for Best Animated Short Subject, which is pretty wonderful. We'll find out if it made the final 5 on January 22nd. In the meantime, Charlie is here to talk about Heavy Metal, the 1981 animated anthology that was supposed to bring the sexy sci-fi aesthetic of the cutting-edge fantasy magazine to North American cinemas, and which kind of failed to do that, partially because it was written and produced by the Stripes team of Dan Steinberg, Len Blum, and Ivan Reitman, which made for kind of a weird fit. But they did recruit a lot of their very talented friends to do the voice work, including John Candy, Harold Ramis, Eugene Levy, Joe Flaherty, Susan Roman, Al Waxman, John Vernon, Harvey Atkin, Marilyn Lightstone, August Schellenberg, and Jackie Burroughs. So the result, as you can imagine, made for a very strange experience for anyone who grew up watching Canadian film and TV. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Oh boy.
Where did
Heavy Metal, I guess the answer to that, which might not be an answer, is Heavy Metal is A, I've seen it maybe 1,000 times. And B, it's, one of few movies that if I walk into a room or I'm changing a channel and it's on, I'll watch wherever I come in at and finish it till the end.
Okay.
Like I can't put it on and walk away from it. Like I've seen it, so familiar with it, and it's very much comfort food, and it's funny, and it's nice to watch as I get older. And my perspectives have changed, and the movie has stayed the same. It's neat to kind of different opinions on different parts of it.
Well, when did you first experience? When did you discover it?
Oh, I would have been little, definitely a kid, maybe 8 or something. Yeah. And it wasn't like someone put it on for me. It was the same. That's why I love Heavy Metal, is because it was the late night cable TV movie that I feel like every major broadcaster just had a license for it. So whenever they couldn't find something to put on at 11 p.m., throw Heavy Metal in there in that time slot. So it was just always on TV at night. And when I grew up, our house was pretty unfinished, and I shared a bedroom with my brother. So on a lot of weekends, I would basically ask or just eventually allow myself to sleep in the basement because we had a pull-out couch. So it was space to myself, but more than that, I had the TV and I could watch TV late night. So I was one of those kids who I would stay up watching TV till 6 a.m. and then go to school for 7:30 the next day, and I just never felt tired. So it was just always on. And with the Space Channel and all the late night movies that they played, Earth Girls Are Easy, other ones like that, where that would just didn't have Buckaroo Banzai, movies are known in cult movies, but they're reliable.
Yeah, and those are films you sort of need to figure out for yourself, too.
Mm-hmm.
They're all really strange, specific science fiction worlds, those 3 films that you mentioned. Buckaroo Banzai. Sorry, I got lost there. But it's such a different experience from what I had when I was a kid. I was also that kid. I would watch movies. I would watch TV all night, but there was nothing on. This is the days when cable had 12 channels and there was just nothing to watch. I watched a lot of black and white monster movies as a kid because that was what was available, and a lot of old pulp film noir stuff that was just readily part of a broadcast syndication library.
Yeah.
The idea, it must have been great to grow up with more than those options, but also the sci-fi stuff is so much more sophisticated than the things I was watching.
I mean, well, it could be more sophisticated. What was that Jesse Ventura, Abraxas?
Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe. I saw that thing. Right.
It could very easily be very, very lowbrow, and Heavy Metal has tons of lowbrow elements too. It's pretty, it's. I can't think of a term that's.
It's a very strange film. Yeah. I think we can get into it that way before we get into the stuff that, as you mentioned, has grown more problematic over time.
For a 12-year-old with hormones,
I was going to say, when you're a kid, how do you process that? Because it came out when I was 15 or 16, if I got the numbers right. Mm-hmm. And I remember not going to see it because I was too good for heavy metal. Like that was my position as a budding snob. It was just like, oh, really? They made a heavy metal movie? And then later I found out John Candy was one of the voices, and I didn't realize, because there was no communication in the early 80s when this film came out.
Right.
It just barfed out there.
Yeah.
Columbia Pictures released it. It was promoted heavily because of tax breaks here, but I didn't know that. And then I found out all about this later on when it became really hard to find because the music rights kept it off for a while. It was really hard to find it anywhere except the US VHS tapes, I think. Mm-hmm. I finally caught up to it on pay TV here.
Right.
And I think I felt like I was proven right. It is sort of a mess, and tonally it shifts from one story to another, and it's all over the place, and there's this weird predatory thing with the green ball attacking people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is very much true to the vision of heavy metal, the magazine, which is all about weird self-contained science fiction universes yelling at each other.
Well, and I like also the anthology aspect to it as well. Like that was something that was and I'm a short filmmaker now with feature film ambitions, but sure. I do like short content, and I always have. The series I really loved as a kid was Amazing Stories.
Sure, yeah.
And that's, I feel like because it's shorter, there's kind of more expectations that will be a little bit more campy, so it is usually a little bit, but when you can still slip those really sincere elements into them, and then, now as an adult watching back, that's just all pure nostalgia for me, so it's like it being a nice blanket.
Yeah.
But for heavy metal, it was, the draw was probably, I was a young boy, so, play with toy guns and swords and all that's in this movie, but it's a cartoon, so, when you're a kid, you're kind of brought up like cartoons are safe, like I can watch this, I won't be in trouble for putting this on. I didn't recognize the voices, but eventually, when it would be on or I'd be watching it, my mom would be like, oh, that's John Candy, that's Eugene Levy, because, we grew up watching SCTV all that stuff. So there's all that familiarity that, all the blood and gore and the tits and stuff, that was almost on the sidebar. Right. Whereas the main stuff, warriors and evil and, battles and... the soundtrack is something I wouldn't grow into until my late teens, early 20s, which is another thing because I wasn't really into, I was, the 12-year-old kid that listened to the Beatles, and then it's only now that I started listening to more kind of older punk rock and older metal,
right. It
back
now
then.
It is it's classic rock now, which
exactly,
is really bizarre.
It's not that heavy, but yeah, I started getting into the skateboard scene and all that, and more underground scenes, and heavy metal is such a feature and all that, and then fast forward 5 years and I'm getting into the stop motion world, and heavy metal is such the tentpole for that kind of thing. There's no animator that hasn't seen it, and
and it is so specific and weird and singular that even they tried to make a sequel in 2000, Heavy Metal 2000, and it's terrible.
Yeah, it's forgettable.
Yeah, but everybody immediately said, no matter what their objections were, it was also that, that's not heavy metal. It's not the thing that I think of.
Yeah. And
that's the thing that keeps me thinking about it now. When you suggested it, it's that does make a perfect line. It lines up perfectly with what your short is about, even though your short isn't about what it says it's about. The title is a mislead. And I'll tweet out the link to the Vimeo page so people can actually see it and understand it, because that will help. But yeah, my Dead Dad's Porno Tapes is not about your Dead Dad's Porno Tapes, and heavy metal kind of is one of those things that would be hidden up in the ceiling. With
it's something that you kind of need to discover, I feel.
There's something illicit about the movie now too.
Yeah, and now if you, there aren't still video stores, but the image of Tarna in the skimpy outfit, if a mom's walking down the aisle with her kid and they point out that, that's no, we're not going to rent that. We're not going to watch that. So that's kind of why it was, a movie found by channel surfing, just like some of the other movies I mentioned, weird colors, weird characters, unrecognizable actors sometimes, or recognizable ones too. It's like Earth Girls Are Easy. Like, oh, why is Jim Carrey in this thing? Like, that kind of stuff.
Is that Damon Wayans?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
furry Damon Wayans. Yeah, and you have to stop. Heavy Metal was one of those things where when you flipped across it, I would assume you just have to figure out where you were in it, like, for the first time, because there are a lot of barriers to entry. It doesn't really make for an easy watch. Even just looking at it again before we did this, I realized that the den sequence, there's no dialogue that explains any of it. It just, you're thrown in there, and it's just this weird male wish fulfillment thing.
Yep.
That is what the Den comic was, what Richard Corbin's comic was, but it's so strange to hear John Candy's voice coming out of this giant muscle barbarian.
Yeah, and I feel like the way he played it, like, he was self-aware of the ridiculousness of it. Like, he's doing that big, deep, booming, slow, simple speech kind of thing. And his internal monologue is like this wiry, smart, fast-talking guy, right? So it's a weird thing. But yeah, I love it. Like,
we can't choose what we love.
Yeah.
It is, it's a movie that simultaneously feels like people cared about it a whole lot, and also that people were just doing it for the money. There's this bizarre collision. I think it happens in the interstitials where there's the sense that the animators or the producers are just going, I don't know, just green ball.
Yeah, well, and that might be, like, I know that how it was produced was produced with a ton of different animation houses, and that wasn't for let's give every segment its own unique style. That was like, let's make this movie within a year kind of thing. So, maybe some of the hands working on it were treating it like a job, and we're rushing through it, and there's a lot going on, so that made it kind of confusing, and for the higher ups and the producers to really see what was being made. But the core people, the writers, Ivan Reitman, like the directors, I feel like they're kind of allowed to more silently steer, what they want it to be, which is what it ended up being, right?
Yeah, I'd love to see the script and just, what was cut, what was kept, how much of it was shifted around. Is this the original running order? Because I don't think it is. I mean, some part of my brain tells me that
I don't think it is. No, and that's what's weird about this is it presents them all in a different order.
Right. Yes. So we have here, just as a reference, we have The Art of Heavy Metal, which is the New York Zoetrope book. I'm sure I own this at some point. Which is the animation for the 80s, which totally turned out not to be. But yeah, this is how they sold it. The world's greatest animation artists collaborate on what may be the best animated film since Yellow Submarine or Fantasia. And again, to put those two things up there in terms of complexity, maybe, but they really seem to be misjudging the audience for these things.
Yeah, I think this movie was made for teenage boys. And
Heavy Metal, the magazine, always claimed that it was made for adults. But I mean, maybe initially it was, but the things that Metal Hurlant turned towards as they realized they were becoming successful, and some part of my brain is telling me National Lampoon bought it for a while in the 80s, or owned it, steered it.
The guy who, I can't remember his name, but the guy who co-owned or co-founded National Lampoon owned
Matty
it.
Simmons? Was that it?
No, I think it even says it in here.
Oh, maybe. If he was involved. Yeah.
Oh, Len Mogul.
Len Mogul, which is the best possible name for somebody to do that. So he was one of the National Lampoon?
Yeah, it says founder, publisher of Heavy Metal, and co-founder of National Lampoon.
Oh, okay. I guess he was one of the guys who sat in the background.
Yeah.
But what a weird place, because Lampoon also turned towards, they did like a hard turn towards pandering and TNA humor based on how Animal House did. I mean, they always used nudity, but it was really torqued up in the 80s.
Yeah.
As was everything else. And it always fascinated me that Heavy Metal and Nat Lamp came out of the same house for a while, because they're so completely different, other than the pandering to teenage boys who are not their original audience, but who are clearly where the money is.
Yeah, well, I think the similarity there would be, here's a genre that we know group of people either a little or a lot are into, so let's just feed all kinds of content into that genre, whether it's, essays or comics or, ads. And they knew how to take an interest and piece together, or how to package together a product in a magazine for someone, right? And Lampoon, it was humor, and Heavy Metal was sci-fi fantasy. And
The one thing I remember taking away from Heavy Metal around the time the movie came out was that they published an issue with a photo spread of Debbie Harry and H.R. Giger. And Giger had designed all sorts of insane airbrush costumes for Debbie Harry to wear, and that was how I think I discovered Heavy Metal. It's like, these people are involved.
Okay.
And then it turned out to be nothing at all like that.
Have you seen his documentary?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one was weird and sad, and like his home is like, it's cool but disturbing.
Yeah, it's like a temple to his own obsessions, to his fetishes, and the more time you spend with them, the more you realize, oh, you're really alone. Like, you just do this. This is your thing.
Yep.
And again, there's that heavy metal hermit art thing, right? Like, that's the sort of thing that appealed presumably to people who read the magazine, who read the comic books, the stories they put out.
Yeah.
And the movie is aimed at a wider audience, but there's that divide that it never really clears, I think. Like, I don't know that that's a negative either. The movie captures the comic, the magazine's soul, in a way that almost works against it being a movie, because it's sort of so deep and immersive in its storylines that you really can't be distracted. You need to be alone with it, almost. And I never saw it with an audience, but I kind of wonder how it would have played in a room with 500 people.
This is a movie that I would die to see with an audience.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something I've been really trying to do a lot over the past few years. Like, I just saw David Byrne's True Stories at the Royal, and that was amazing. And then the next night I got to see him perform.
Oh, yes.
What was it, last year when they were doing all the P.T. Anderson films and seeing Boogie Nights with the audience, and, you know, where you hear the preemptive laughs, like, for lines, which can be a bit annoying at times, but...
Yeah. But then you hear other people getting it for the first time.
Yeah. And it's just Heavy Metal, and I maybe shouldn't say this, but apparently what was the Underground Cinema on Spadina?
The Toronto Underground Cinema, yeah.
Apparently there's a 35mm print in that building in a janitor's closet somewhere.
Still?
Of Heavy Metal, yeah. So it was a plan of mine and a good friend who also adores this movie that we were going to break in one day and steal it. Not that I have a 35mm projector, but...
That's irrelevant.
To have that physical copy of the movie as, like, you know, that would be a good totem.
Yeah, I can totally understand that impulse.
Yeah, but I haven't bought the ski mask yet, so, you know, I'll get around to it.
Yeah, you have the window between this coming out and today. No jury would convict you. That's like, why
no, I'm above the law.
Yeah, for
I'm
this,
fine.
This is an art theft.
Yeah,
this is fine. It's such a. There's a movie in that too. It's a film that does inspire this loyalty. When it went away for a while because of the music rights. It was never easily available on video, and then I think the Blu-ray release was some kind of weird arcane thing that Sony set up through Amazon. You could only get it from them for a while. There were 5 or 6 titles that were specific to.
Well, yeah, I looked up. It was just in 2011 that it came out, and I was surprised that was that recent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or maybe it was a Best Buy exclusive. But it was really hard to find. I still don't have it, and I was getting literally everything that they put out at that time.
It's in here somewhere.
I'm sure there's a VHS. There's a DVD of it somewhere.
Yeah.
But there probably was a VHS of it too. But you could not get it for love or money for the longest time, even on DVD. I think it came out when Heavy Metal 2000 came out. They found a way to sort of twin them.
Right. Yeah.
Made it viable.
They should just stay away from each other.
Yeah, they do.
And now there's all this talk that, I know it's been like a decade-long conversation that's going to be remade, I think, as live action.
Oh, God. I mean, you could, but why would you?
Yeah, it's...
You have a lot of cold actors.
We'll see.
I guess the success of 300 probably demonstrates that you can do anything in a stylized comic book format, you know, green screen the world of it, but why would you, short of the problem I think with doing a live action version of the stories in this collection is that they wouldn't work with people. Like, they have to
that, or even if they did an animated version of it, it's like
it's already been done.
It's the concept of a film property being attached to kind of like a fan club type of magazine is a bit gone. Like, the people who are going to watch the movie are guys like you and me, and we're going to reluctantly do it, and
and then
maybe never watch it again.
Probably complaining
right?
it isn't as good as the original.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you even do? Like, what could satisfy people now that is a heavy metal concept?
It would have to be its own thing. It would have to take the risk and make itself different. But or I don't know that would necessarily be a remake, but it would take the core concept of heavy metal and like spit out something different.
How do you update it, and how do you make it work? Even the most recent attempts to relaunch Conan the Barbarian have suffered from being too rooted in what they think they used to be.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
What I don't like about those movies is that they kind of short the original for me. Like even when South Park did the parody of heavy metal, that kind of hurt the original heavy metal a bit for me, because it was kind of like, I felt like I had this thing that I knew a lot of other people liked, but it wasn't something everyone liked. And when it ends up out in the world in something like South Park that everyone knows and watches, then they know it as that rather than what it originally is, right? And that kind of, whenever you mention someone, they're like, oh yeah, that South Park thing, rather than, oh yeah, heavy metal.
Yeah, the parody replaces it.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a loving parody, that can actually help, but almost never does. It doesn't turn out that way. Mm-hmm. And the expectations are always going to be so specific to the audience member, right? Like, it'll never be exactly the thing that you need it to be and someone else needs it to be. I'm trying to think, what was the one example? There's this, weirdly enough, I'm thinking about Aquaman, which...
Right.
Have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen it.
It kind of looks, towards the end, once it really plunges into the comic book universe, it's really fun, because it's the first time I think DC has allowed its movies to reflect the fact that these are made of comic book origins, that they don't have to be super serious or super realistic. And there's a moment where I just thought, oh, this is Flash Gordon. Like, this is the 1980 Flash Gordon movie, which is sort of a heavy metal movie in its own way.
Could have done Flash Gordon, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
The same itch is scratched?
Yeah, I feel like Flash Gordon was even later night. Kind of movie.
Yeah, it would have been. It was I love that.
But yeah, Flash Gordon is kind of a bit more of a one-note joke for me, whereas heavy metal kind of has a bit more nuance and a bit more depth to it.
Yeah, but Flash Gordon is effectively, in its second half at least, it's like, it's got all the weird fetishism, it's got heavy sexualization, it's got homoeroticism that even the movie doesn't seem to fully understand. It's got the heavy metal touch.
Yep.
Kind of. And weirdly, Mobius didn't work on it. He designed Besson's Fifth Element and did some other stuff here and there, but yeah, that's one he didn't touch, and it still feels like...
Yeah, it's a knockoff.
Like it escaped from heavy metal. But that thing predates both of them. I mean, Flash Gordon properties go back to the 30s, I think, if I remember correctly. And then that stuff was based on Lensman, and it goes on and on and on. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, being a kid and seeing Flash Gordon again. I was 12 when I saw it for the first time. And I saw that in the theater, and that was amazing. That was I think I went back that same week to see it again, as was the style at the time. There's one movie, let's go see it again.
Yeah, well, it was tricky for me, because... when I first saw it, I was a kid, same age, like 10 to 12. Saw parts of it, and I think I passed out or fell asleep.
Right.
And then another time, maybe that same summer, I thought I was watching it, but it was like a showcase movie called Flesh Gordon.
Oh, good God.
So it was like the porn kind of knockoff.
Yep.
And I was confused. I was like, oh, was that other kind of goofy movie I was watching this movie?
Yeah.
And then, my parents were still up, so I turned away from it and kind of would put it on mute and invest back and see what I was watching. Yeah. So after that, I kind of, the third attempt was like, when I was trying to watch Flesh Gordon, I saw it was in the preview channel that was coming up, so I was like, oh, I'm going to watch that. And I watched Flash Gordon from start to finish, waiting for the nude scenes, basically. And I was like, oh, no. It wasn't until, I think a while later that I realized that it was two different things, and I got trapped into it.
Yeah, how young would you have had to be to just not...
Well, I wasn't very bright. I was not a...
I'm just imagining what this does to someone to watch all of these, because this is, again, something that I was completely shielded from. We didn't have there was no VCR in my home until I was in my teens. We just didn't have it. The technology was... My dad had one, my mom didn't have one. And...
There's all that Moses Znaimer late night TV, that just is perfect for a young boy.
This is such a Toronto experience. I don't know how you describe
and even more than that, like there's Sunday Night Sex Show with Sue, like all that stuff, which was educational. And I remember a big one because the thing was when I would sleep in the basement and stay up late watching these shows and watching these movies, my parents' bedroom was directly above.
Okay.
And there was a cutout hole where the ventilation went, that the ventilation had been reworked, so it was just a hole between the rooms. So like I had to be very sensitive to the volume of the TV whenever I did find some of these racier shows.
So you're creating an entire taboo network for yourself.
Yeah, all on mute too.
Without understanding it fully.
And I remember coming across what I would eventually learn was Trailer Park Boys.
Oh yeah.
And I was watching, I was like, whoa, what is this? This is cool. Like, and then it was like, oh, this is a reality show? And then they were like, you know, smoking weed and shooting guns. And I was like, I remember being convinced that that was a documentary or a real show. So I was like, I shouldn't be watching this while they can hear what I'm watching. Like, I'll put it away, like, to something else. And, like, got startled off from watching that the first couple attempts. And then later when you found out, no, it's all for laughs and it's a mockumentary, it's fine.
This is like people who thought the Blair Witch Project was real based on...
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, not that bright.
I think you're just open to stuff.
Yeah. Or, like, you know, it's when it's late and it's a bit racier and the curiosity gets the better of you, and whether that's, you know, sex or violence or
it's a hint of a world that you don't have access to, right? Like it's the forbidden because it's literally not allowed, and then suddenly it is after whatever o'clock the world opens up.
Yeah, after 11 p.m.
Yeah, this is what Cronenberg's Videodrome was about. This is literally that's what that was. And
that's a movie that it's.
Please don't tell me you saw that when you were 6.
No. I didn't see that. I actually shamefully didn't see that till film school. Till I moved here for film school.
That's all right.
But it has that kind of late night cable TV attitude where it's like, you know, as of 11 p.m. for some reason someone was convinced that only grown-ups are awake at that point. Yeah. So let's put on grown-up TV.
All bets are off.
Yep.
Pull out the heavy metal magazines. It's time.
Yep.
It's such a weird movie to talk about now. I'm still trying to figure out how to write the opening while we're talking. Like, how do you describe it? How do I introduce it to people? And by the time they hear this part of the conversation, they'll have already heard whatever it is I figure out.
Right. Well,
but it's like, you know, it's an animated science fiction fantasy that thinks it's more expensive than it is, because you know, a lot of, you can see in some sequences the corners are being cut, and then there are others that are, as you say, they're incredibly lavish and beautiful, and then the faces look like they were drawn with a pencil in 5 minutes.
Yeah, like parts of it seem slapped together and parts of it seem innovative, even like by today's standards. So it's really kind of the Frankenstein's monster of animated movies, I guess. Like,
yeah, well, because the stuff that was happening around the same time, like Bakshi's Lord of the Rings was around, and with his rotoscoping thing, which kind of feels like they used it in the dens.
They used a lot of rotoscoping in this.
And it's not the same, because Bakshi was dealing with painted backgrounds and things that really don't look like anything else. And there was that sword and sorcery wave, like at the time in the early 80s, that was, it was cheap and it was easy. And you could make, because Conan the Barbarian had made a lot of money, and so there was all this other stuff, Deathstalker and Barbarian Queen, and there was a whole industry pumping out these live-action versions, and they were all terrible.
What's the other one? Conan Red Sonja?
Red Sonja was, that wasn't a good one either. Yeah. It was the cheap knockoff of the Conan movies.
Yeah.
Like the first, to digress for a second, like the big serious Schwarzenegger Conan film, the first one, it's kind of dopey. People loved it. And
I love that movie. I love the whole going from a child slave to modern massive man is just by him turning the wheel for 30 years or whatever.
That is a great image. Yep. Like, that is exactly what the comic.
Let's just watch the size of his legs increase over time and all these cutaway shots and
yeah. But then it just gets so self-serious with the Thulsa Doom stuff and the I Am Your Father. Like, it's just... Yeah. It feels very much like... Because it's Oliver Stone on all the cocaine in the world trying to come up with an anthology out of the comic books, which weirdly echoes how Robert E. Howard wrote them. But...
Forgot that was...
Yeah. And then the second one came along, and I kind of like that one more. Conan the Destroyer.
The Destroyer, yeah. I haven't seen it in too long to even comment. It
just feels more like Conan should feel. It's kind of more self-aware and a little funnier, and it definitely doesn't have the giant stentorian self-seriousness.
Yeah.
And then heavy metal is sort of playing in that sandbox because the Den story is effectively, I was a teenage Conan for lack of anything else, but with way more sexuality that it doesn't fully understand, I think.
Right.
And like that's the thing that I associate with heavy metal, the magazine. I guess this is my own prejudice too, because this is what kept me from seeing it the first time around. Is like, oh, this is a comic book for people who want to be grown-ups but aren't there yet.
Right.
And this is sort of the bridge between comics are silly and comics are serious and sexy and grim and adult. Like it's somebody's idea of what adult is.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie kind of embraces that in a way that I don't know. I certainly didn't give it credit for it at the time. When I caught up to it later, it's just like, oh, I think it knows what it's doing. Like it's
and there is a good sensibility to it, and I rewatched it last night, of course, and
of course
that was, when you look at the hands that were at play, like the John Candys and the Harold Ramises, like, people that also did contribute to their own writing, they probably were quite self-aware of what it was, and you can tell that especially when certain characters played the smaller bit parts, they're playing it way hammier and way more kind of throwaway, but for the sake of adding to that, like, this isn't supposed to take itself seriously. Like, this is allowed to be funny and cheeky and
everyone forgets Ivan Reitman started with Cannibal Girls. Like he was not always a comedy guy. I mean, Cannibal Girls is funny, and it stars Eugene Levy and Andrea Martin, and it was sold as an exploitation movie. It was produced as a tax shelter blood and guts and sexy ladies movie, which it is not, but it kind of also is. It's hard to explain. I'm sure I have that here somewhere.
I've never seen it.
It is a Canadian classic, sort of. But it's his sensibility is clearly, if you get comic actors, if you put funny people in these roles, they will make stuff up, that they will make the characters work.
Yeah, and they kind of protect the film a little bit because they put that little bit of the shield where whether you're trying to be serious and you put that comedian element there, if the serious doesn't work or doesn't pay off the way you meant it to, then it's like, okay, well, we have this balance to it, so take it for that rather than something that's more diehard. And
it's an insurance policy.
Yeah, exactly, and it works. Like in some movies, it completely holds up today. Like, Bill Murray, right? Like who?
Oh, just something. With
always kind of played the dog-eyed, goofy guy, but if you took the script on paper, it's like, oh no, like Meatballs. Like this is about friendship and standing up to kind of people who have it made easier than you, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's not.
You throw him in there, and like there are people who rewatch now because it's a Bill Murray movie, and the original kind of selling factor of that about kids at camp is probably dead and gone. Now it's just forever going to be a Bill Murray movie.
Yeah. No, it's true. He adds this anarchic charge to everything just because you really don't know why he's there, like why his character is there in Meatballs. It happens in Ghostbusters too. Peter Venkman is kind of a terrible person, but also you can't not watch him. You have to keep looking to see what he's going to do.
It adds like that element of irreverence to, if they weren't there, then everyone would just be a straight man, and it wouldn't work.
Yeah, certainly. Conan with the voice of John Candy is a different animal. Like, it's a completely different animal, and it is just his voice is too high and reedy to inhabit that space. So when he puts on the deeper voice, what you mentioned earlier, when he drops it, sounds like he's trying. He sounds like he's trying too hard to be big, fierce sword warrior guy.
Yeah, he's not. I can't obviously speak to what was going through his mind, but it doesn't sound so much like I'm going to try and sound like a tough guy, like a big, strong. I'm not going to get into that headspace. It sounds like I'm going to sound like a parody of a tough guy kind of thing.
He's selling it to the people around him.
Yeah. He's one of the few actors, like John Candy, anything with a minute you have to watch, like kind of thing. Same thing, if it's on TV and you watch it, you finish it kind of thing.
Even Nothing But Trouble?
I love Nothing But Trouble.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that is... Okay.
That's the Dan Aykroyd one, right? Yeah, with Chevy Chase and Demi Moore.
Yeah.
That, I can talk about Nothing But Trouble for a while. That is a movie that I know I saw it when I was really little, like maybe like 3 or 4. And it was the 2 weird prosthetic brothers in the junkyard. And that is all I remembered. And for years, like up until my mid-20s, I was convinced that was a dream I had.
See, I know people respond to this movie that way.
Yeah.
This is not the first time I've heard someone describe it that way.
I didn't think it was real, and somehow I like remembered it again and latched onto it, and I was like, no, that must have been a real movie. And, with, the development of, the Google search engine, I feel like you can throw the most random, like, brothers, junkyard, monsters, like
Mr. Bone
movie
Stripper. ?
Eventually you'll see a still image, like kind of thing. And that's how I refound it and rediscovered it. It was like, wow, this is terrible, but it was also like it had a certain I had that, like, having that success of being able to find it again.
Yeah, oh no, that's amazing. It's a totem.
Yeah.
I am kind of fascinated by that movie because it is so...
And the weird throwaway dick nose joke.
Yeah,
like,
if you look up...
And Tupac is in it.
Yep. Yeah, if you Google Dan Aykroyd penis nose, this is the thing that comes up. Not that anyone should do that, but if you win the Oscar, you can come back and talk about Nothing But Trouble.
Yeah, well, I think I maybe overstepped. I think that was all I could comment on it, really.
No, that's good. That's plenty. But just the fact that it haunted you that way, that it got into your head and didn't leave.
I was like, that couldn't have been a movie. Like,
I saw it. It was.
Yeah,
sort of. That's fascinating. Okay, so just to get us out of this before we do end up talking more about it again, because that is one of those things where it's like, it almost feels like outsider art that some insane artist convinced a studio to throw money at it, and that person just happened to be Dan Aykroyd. Yeah. It was a passion project for him. He tried to make it for years. Okay, so we'll get out of that, and we'll put a pin in it. But as far as heavy metal goes, based on what I've seen of that and what I've seen of your work, of My Dead Dad's Porno tapes, is there anything from heavy metal that you borrowed or lifted or stole, just in terms of some kind of an animation bridge or any other way that it's seeped into your work?
With Dead Dad's Porno tapes, it certainly didn't end up in the film, but kind of like what we've been talking about with, as far as atmosphere goes, late night suburban basement cable TV kind of, of that kind of quietly and secretly watching and exposing yourself to material, whether it's heavy metal or porno tapes, like, and that innately kind of makes you precious about the material. So I know that wasn't really something that I was like, how can I take that concept and stew into the movie? But it's always been present in a lot of my films. I love, the image of a dark space that only had the lights that are on is all that you can see, and it directs what you see, and like and working with animation is great because that is just all the more controllable and it becomes practical. Like there was a film I did a few years ago called I Thought I Told You to Shut Up, which was my first time working with stop motion, and actually the guy who was supposed to steal the heavy metal print with me, Brett Lawn, he did the stop motion for that, and it was about an artist, David Boswell, and his comic book property, Reed Fleming, that, almost made it into a Hollywood film.
World's Angriest Milkman?
World's Toughest Milkman. And the thing about David Boswell is he illustrates his comics alone in the middle of the night. So he's in Vancouver, and in Ontario, we rebuilt his entire basement workspace. Like, we replicated his drafting table, restacked like the things he had on his desk, and it was an artist who's been working in his space for upwards of 30 years, so it was pretty tricky to replicate a lot of stuff, but we wanted to create that weird atmosphere where it's calm and it's peaceful, but there are people sleeping upstairs, so you have to be quiet a little bit, and like what the light sees is what we want the audience to see, because that's where the animation comes to life, is what the light is projecting on, right? And that sounds a bit more Heidi than it really sells. It's still just a gag, but yeah, I just, it's that atmosphere that I've always been so drawn to, and like, it's, as far as what made in Dead Dads, it was just that quiet exploration, where you don't want to alert anyone that you're snooping around.
Right.
Like, I'm a snoop, like, kind of thing. Like,
the sense of something secret.
Yeah. And, yeah, it will probably forever be in the stuff I make until I grow out of it.
No, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to grow out of it. It's something that's so primal and instantly understandable, right? The idea of not necessarily the forbidden, but the idea that you found something that maybe you weren't supposed to see, or maybe you needed to see.
Yeah.
Which sort of plays throughout the entire... All the things we see in Dead Dad's porno tapes are things that you needed to see, or things that you saw and are sharing with us.
Yeah.
And the impact of that is, like, it's really profound. It's something that kind of wallops you by the end of it. I don't know that anything in
Yeah, well, it's weird because, like, you know, they're just things, they're objects, but they're echoes of a whole life.
Yeah.
Like, when my friends and I, when we were kids and teenagers, like, you break into abandoned buildings and abandoned houses, right? And you look through and you see these pieces that are leftovers of people, and if they're not dead, they're at least gone from there, and they're clues. They're whether the clue leads to something that's worth discovering or not, they are still pieces that, you know, are so fragile to time, because eventually, you know, that leftover furniture is going to be destroyed or sold or donated. The things in that drawer, the way that they're placed, the way that that person placed them there, that's going to get emptied out, and or the floor is going to be swept, and what's on there is going to be gone forever, right? So it's a weird version of, you know, curation.
Yeah.
When you have a limited amount of objects or pieces, and we're not just talking photos, we're talking a chewed up pencil, we're talking, you know, a broken wristwatch. When there's just a limited amount of that, then, you know, what can you piece together?
Yeah.
Like,
It's archaeology.
yeah.
I mean, the boxes in here are probably... I'm sure there's a heavy metal...
If you exploded or vaporized into thin air and someone had to look through this place, like, what would this room tell about you? Yours is much more organized than most people, and it would certain things would be clear. This guy loves movies.
Yeah, I was a hoarder, but I was a very OCD hoarder.
Yeah, but then there's probably other things that are, you know, why is this here? And what does this say? Like,
isn't that the most important question of all?
Yeah.
Why is this here? Why is heavy metal here? Because it's awesome.
Yep. Fuck yeah.
My thanks to Charlie Tyrell, whose Oscar-shortlisted short, My Dead Dad's Porno Tapes, is viewable on the New York Times website and on Vimeo. We'll post a link on the show's Twitter account. You should see it. It's really great. Thanks also to Nicola Pender. She knows what she did. You can find Charlie on Twitter at Charlie_Tyrell, and you can find Heavy Metal on Blu-ray and DVD from Sony Pictures Home Entertainment in a version that includes an entire rough cut of the film, which is pretty cool. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy the show, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.